Good morning, Gamecock fans. JC Shurburt here with you with coffee. I think we're at a baker's dozen. Episode 13. It is Wednesday, January the 29th, Hump Day, or as it's now known on the Chief Sports Network, Inside the Gamecocks, JC Shurburt Day. You'll be hearing a lot from me today. In addition to this, I'll be on Inside the Gamecocks, the show for my weekly meetup with JB around 11 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll chop it up about this, that, and the other. And then, of course, Inside the Gamecocks, the show from 12 to 2 with myself and Mad Dog Mullinax. It never ceases to be entertaining on the show. So we really want you to check that out. If you can't check it out live, if those second hours are just not in your wheelhouse, be sure to come back right here on YouTube. All the shows are archived. And then, of course, podcast format where you can get this and all of our other shows, including the Late Night Gamecock Show, the walkthrough, all of our specials during the season, like Rooster Rant, not the tailgate show. We don't put the tailgate show on the podcast stream because we do it early in the morning on game day. And by the time it hits that podcast stream, the game will be over and we'll sound like fools and you'll waste your time doing it. But put everything else on there that's under the Inside the Gamecocks umbrella on Chief Sports. You can find a way to subscribe to that for free on thebigspur.com, or you could just go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you get a nice podcast version of all that we do right here. It's not commercial free with the big shows as far as local commercials go, but we chop up the intro and all that to make sure that you get a max listening experience. And for a while there, those weren't going up in a timely manner, but we've fixed the glitch, to quote Office Space, so to speak. And those are going up right, within hours after the show. Because you have to download it, you have to make an MP3, you have to upload. It's a long process. You don't want to hear about that this morning. Tough night on the hardwood last night for the Gamecock men's basketball team. I'll circle back on that, but they did lose to Georgia 71-60. Ugly game, 17 more turnovers. Why are things all right? So before we get to the football stuff, why does South Carolina athletically have trends that carry over from team to team during seasons? A few years ago, it was that nobody could score. Not even Dawn Staley's team could score. I mean, they played a lot of 60 to 40-ish type games. Didn't shoot the ball well. That's changed, obviously. In football this year, what hurt the Gamecocks more than anything? Turnovers. Now we're here in men's basketball, and they turned the ball over. Now, the women's team, I haven't looked at their turnover stats. But that year that nobody could score, baseball went through a big, long drought where they couldn't hit the ball either. It's weird how that happens and has to be frustrating for fans, but 17 more turnovers last night. Gamecocks cut it to 18-16 at one point in the first half after falling behind by 11 early. Wasn't much chance of victory following that. I'm less sympathetic, I'll tell you that right now, because that was a sloppy game. Not that they didn't fight or try, but it was, they didn't do anything hardly necessary to win. Good job getting up off the mat after falling into a hole. By the way, Stegman Coliseum has been getting good crowds in there, but last night, South Carolina's not the only program that's having trouble getting people to their basketball games. Apparently around the SEC, there's not much buzz. Feinbaum mentioned that there's not enough air for basketball in the league. Go figure. In this year that it's a banner season for the league. So that's something to explore. Maybe we'll talk about it on the show, Inside the Gamecocks, the show later today. But the Gamecocks do fall to 0-8, and now, you kind of look and say, well, where's a possible win coming from? I don't know. I don't know that Texas A&M coming in here this weekend, they're really good. They're due against South Carolina, much like Georgia. So I don't know where are the winds coming from. So anyway, but I'll circle back on that. Maybe I won't. Maybe I said enough on it right now. But I want to talk today about the tight end position, and specifically as we get back into our player profiles for the 2024 cycle, which again, I'll repeat, I think could be already has been in some ways the most significant recruiting cycle of the Shane Beamer era. Now, I say that a lot, and I'll continue to say it, but I'll also stipulate that I hope 2025 and 2026 and 2027, which I can't believe we're talking about, grows in significance because that's growth with your program. My hope is you look back on the 2024 cycle and say, yeah, that's the class that really got it started. If you remember the Steve Spurrier era, you had the '07 class, which was ranked in the top 10. I think ESPN had it as high as fourth. A lot of players that played up to their potential, a lot of players like Pat DeMarco that surpassed their potential in that class. He was the lowest rated player in the class and played 10 years in the NFL and was a key member of a lot of the Gamecock teams he was on, especially the SEC East Championship team in 2010. So, but then there were a lot of guys in that class that didn't, quite frankly, play up to their lofty rankings. I get blamed for that class sometimes by fans of other schools because I was doing rankings at the time. And I'll own the Chris Culliver wide receiver thing. I was young. My boss kind of forced that on us after watching him in an all-star game. I'll own that part of it, but ESPN and at the time Scout.com all had South Carolina's players ranked really, really high. There was little difference in the rankings that year as far as Carolina's players are concerned. So I think the entire industry maybe overrated that class a bit. Still, you got Steven Garcia in that class, a winning quarterback. Cliff Matthews was in that class. Travian Robertson was in that class. Wesley Saunders was in that class. Melvin Ingram was in that class. So a lot of studs too. Probably just not the fourth ranked class in the country when you look back on it. But I think the class that really turned it for the Gamecocks, and it was one of those things in the universe, fellas and ladies, that, stars collided. Because '08, I've said this before, was Spurrier's worst team. Things on the field were not what I would call good. And it was his fourth year. And there was some doubt starting to creep in. Nobody was going to fire Steve Spurrier. Spurrier himself said he thought a little bit about just saying this isn't for me after the Outback Bowl where they got slaughtered by Iowa. I mean, that's probably one of the worst stretches of his college coaching career because you lose at Florida 56-6, a team you had definitely competed against pretty well your first 3 years. Florida won the national championship. They were really good. Clemson in the Dabo Bowl beat Carolina pretty good, 31-14. South Carolina wasn't their day that day. It was Clemson's day. And then they get to after making some coaching changes, they get to the Outback Bowl, lose by 3 touchdowns, and then boom, Ron Cooper to LSU, David Reeves, Tennessee. A lot of shakeup. Actually, David Reeves had gone to Tennessee before, right after the Clemson game, because Beamer, who's the head coach now, was promoted as coordinator. But I think that '09 class, now check this out. You had Tommy Bowden at Clemson departing midseason after a top 10 ranking, and then a loss to Wake Forest, and then Dabo took over or whatever. Stephon Gilmore was probably coming to South Carolina anyway by that point in time. The Gamecocks had gone down the road toward flipping him pretty good. It was Carolina and Alabama. But you got Devontae Holloman out of that. Philip Fulmer gets fired at Tennessee. Tennessee had committed DJ Swearinger. People don't remember this. And the Gamecocks went back and flipped him back. And in North Carolina, I think they had some, coaching changes or whatever that sort of helped the efforts in that state. That was more the '07 class when you got Ingram and some guys like that, if I'm remembering correctly. We'll go back and revisit the North Carolina thing. I got to make sure my NC State North Carolina coaching change timelines are jumbled together in my head. But Carolina, and I'm not saying they wouldn't have gotten these guys anyway, but there was a lot of transition at South Carolina. 6 assistant coaches left. And back then, now you can kind of get by with that because your personnel director, like Darren Usher now, Taylor Edwards before him, they do so much more in recruiting. They handle a lot more as far as the actual recruiting goes. You can put analysts on the road now. Your head coach, now at South Carolina, the last 2 coaches, Muschamp and Beamer, are more heavily involved in recruiting than Spurrier. And that's just how it was. It's not that Spurrier. I would never. Spurrier brought a lot of good players to the school, so I'm not. Oh, he can't recruit. No, he needed people to help him, and those were a lot of, in many ways, the assistant coaches. So you changed all those coaches left. They brought in guys. They brought in G.A. Mangus. They brought in Jay Graham. They brought in Lorenzo Ward. All those coaches were very significant in recruiting. And then, they also flipped Alshon Jeffrey back from Southern Cal and held off Tennessee in that class. So you had Holloman, you had Gilmore, you had Alshon Jeffrey in that class, you had Swearinger. The list goes on and on and on with that '09 class. I think it finished around 15th in the country. So that class, when I look back on those great years under Spurrier, was really the one, in combination with '07, because '07 and combined with '09, in '09, these guys were all second year players, really facilitated, the SEC East Championship. And then '09 combined with 2010 when you get Marcus Lattimore and Connor Shaw. And then 2011, it goes on and on and on. And then eventually some of those later classes didn't pan out as well. So and the bottom fell out, but that's okay. That's okay. So my hope is for 2024, we look back on it and it's maybe a little bit more of a linear journey where every class gets a little bit better. And we'll talk today on the show about the 2025 class because the new rankings, final rankings, are coming out on 24/7 Sports. I've seen the list. As always, there's stuff I don't agree with, namely Jordan Gidron's rating being not a 4-star. If it's supposed to be a projection, enrolling early should not move the projection backward. If anything, it should move it forward. I understand in some ways if you're doing a player-to-player comparison and ranking a player, this, that, or the other, that maybe you maybe you keep 4 stars on him, just don't put him in the top 247. But losing a star rating when the rest of the recruiting industry has him up there is baffling. And is there a big difference between an 89 and a 90? No, I say it all the time. High 3 stars generally outperform low 4 stars if you take a sample size and look and who are the 89s. Let's take 10 of those guys, compare them to the 10 90s that you're just kind of hanging on with. The high 3 stars tend to outperform, and then everybody's talking about how they're a sleeper. So I don't know, but there's a lot of good news if you're a Gamecock fan and you care about that. There's players that are going to be ranked higher. So my question with 2025 is going to be, is this a better class than we thought? And we'll talk about that on the show later today because I promised that audience that we would. So you look at it and it's, you hope that 2024 is what gets it started, and then 25 is a little better, then 26 is a little better, and you go on and on and on, and you're signing better and better classes, and then there's the transfer portal. And a lot of the ways that we've discussed that Beamer puts together his roster with this program. So we're going to continue with the 2024 class, and I want to talk about Michael Smith. Now, Michael Smith started the first game of the season. Shane Beamer brings it up often that they started a true freshman at tight end. Considering Josh Simon was the leading receiver on the team, I don't know that they had to necessarily rely on a true freshman at tight end all year. But Michael Smith made some plays, and in preseason camp, there were some clips that came out, highlights that came out where he just made some freaky catches for a guy his size. It was surprising because in high school he's listed like 6'4", 230, 240. Played a lot of receiver. Was a guy I felt just eyeballing him and looking at the height and weight that he would have to grow. But he gets here. He's 6'6", 255. I'm like, wow. And he's freaky. He's freaky. Did he always display it? No, just like any freshman. And, we talk sometimes about things that suck the oxygen out of the room. Like I said, Feinbaum was talking about there's not enough air for men's basketball in the SEC. That means football just sucks the oxygen out. I think Alabama and their 17-year dynasty sucked the oxygen out of the room with college football. and a lot of people, fans, analysts, media, so-called journalists, whoever you want to talk to, because it was so long. I think those folks are sort of searching for the next Alabama. They're like on a journey. They're lost. And that's what's called sucking the oxygen out of the room, because for nearly 2 decades, that was the blueprint, what Alabama did. And then there's all these massive changes in the sport. And it's not that's not how you do it anymore. It's impossible to do it that way because of the portal, entitlement, NIL. Things have changed. So that's sucking the oxygen out of the room. And I think Josh Simon did that at tight end this year. I mean, you look at his numbers, leading receiver on the team, biggest weapon in the passing game, the most consistent weapon by far. Really happy for him, too. He's a great person. I've met him, and competitor. I hope he gets an invite to the NFL Combine. I did see on X yesterday, I'm going to say he tweeted on X. Is that how do you? I guess it's just called post on X now. He posted on X. He tweeted on X. I'm going to say tweet because a lot of you are on the message boards, and a post is on a message board. A tweet is on Twitter. So he tweeted on X, Torricelli Simpkins, that he got invited to the Combine. Thrilled for that young man. Hope Josh Simon gets an invite. He deserves it. I can't imagine an NFL franchise looking at him on film, what he does with yards after the catch, his hands, his mobility, his blocking improved a great deal this year. I can't imagine him not getting invited to the Combine. So when you have Josh Simon, and you're trying to get the ball to your receivers, your passing game's not just a one-trick pony. And you got a new quarterback, quite frankly. Your backup tight end or your tight end that's the other guy that catches passes, he ain't going to have huge stats. But Michael Smith produced while he was in. I like him a lot. Size, athleticism, and it's his time next year. You do have Brady Hunt, and Brady Hunt plays tight end, and they play the same position, but in the usage, it's a lot different. Hunt's kind of what you call an attached guy, lines up at the line, does some blocking, runs some patterns. Smith would be in that category where you kind of split him out along with Jordan Pringle. No, excuse me. Jordan Dingle. I said Pringle the other day. I apologize for that. I find myself doing that a lot lately. But from Kentucky, he's kind of that split out guy. I guess, he's different than Smith physically, probably similar to Josh Simon, I would say, as far as build and things like that. Don't know that he'll be that productive as Josh. I hope they're not relying on the tight end as much this coming season in the passing game. And everybody eats. Is that what they say? That went away, didn't it? Eating. Kirby Smart. I want you to eat. I want you to eat. I want you to eat. Very good video. If you hadn't seen it before, it's not safe for work, but Kirby Smart in Georgia talking about eating. But everybody eats, it's a buffet, if you will, or a smorgasbord of receptions is the hope for next year. But Michael Smith's that next guy. It's his time, right in his second year. Big-time recruit, committed to the Gamecocks really early, was part of that 2024 core that came to the A&M game in 2022, came to Tennessee in 2022, saw the atmosphere, built relationships with the coaches, and they were done. Auburn tried to flip him. Tennessee tried to flip. Everybody tried to flip Michael Smith, and he never wavered. He's from Savannah, Georgia. Savannah's close to the University of South Carolina, by the way. I think it's closer than it is to UGA. It's a huge dog town. I will say that. If you've seen Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which is not a good movie, I didn't think. But there's a character in there that raises the Uggas, and they raise the Uggas in Savannah. Says, "Go dogs!" Whir, whir, whir. Anyway, so he's from Savannah, which is a place Carolina needs to recruit well, and they do. They're very competitive in that coastal Georgia area. Like I said, 6'6", 255. Like any freshman tight end, he had to get used to the blocking. He played at Savannah. In Savannah, and I don't know that it was the highest level of competition in Georgia high school football. In fact, I'll say it's not. But the guy, got better at it as the year went on. Needs to take a jump in that department. You have to block. In this offense, you're going to have to block. as a tight end, no matter if you're attached or split out. Josh Simon had to block. Josh Simon actually became a good blocker. He didn't really have Josh Simon didn't have problems being physical. I don't think Michael Smith is either. I just think it's a matter of developing his game. I think he's kind of a Wesley Saunders type tight end. And when I say that, I know Wesley sort of had an up and down career at Carolina, and whatever happened to him happened. He got caught up in some BS, really, looking back on that compliance wise. But you know how Wesley was huge. He was like 270, 280 at times, but could move and run light feet. Smith's probably a little bit more cut physically, still 6'5", 6'6", that bigger tight end that can rumble down the field and really is fast for his size. Also can jump up and get it. And like Wesley, he was a guy that could jump up as well. Wesley was a good basketball player and make plays. So there's differences between he and Wesley Saunders, but as far as a player comparison in the past, that's who I would compare him to right now, as far as, just this guy that looks like he could go start at power forward somewhere, or small forward, I guess, at 6'6" on the basketball court. Really good hands, really high upside. Best football is still in front of him. How many more football cliches can I use there? Goodness gracious, JC. But a player that I think can double his output at least in the passing game next year. I expect him to start. I guess he is a returning starter technically, but I expect him to start and kind of fill that role. Simon's in, along with Dingle. Dingle's going to factor in. I mean, they have him for 1 year, so they're going to use him as an experienced guy. I think Kentucky with Dingle completely misused him. They needed I mean, I don't know. The chances he got were good. He had some injuries, so here's to a fresh start there. And who knows? He may end up being the guy, and Smith may be another year away. But I strongly feel like if Michael Smith makes that jump, right, that he'll be a very big part of the South Carolina offense in 2025 and a go-to receiver for Lenora Sellers. But you got to improve your blocking. I think that with any second-year player, right now, winter program, get stronger, get faster, go out, play great football. I don't know that Mike Shula's making a wholesale offensive scheme change, but it has been reported and it is known he's going to make some tweaks and changes, probably for the better. I would hope for the better as far as the scheme goes. And so learn the plays, learn the routes. You're not going to play for Sean Elliott if you're not playing tough. And I haven't seen anything that says Michael Smith's not tough. So he got to go play physical football. So I'm really high on Michael Smith. And he's not a guy that's talked about a whole lot just because, like I said, Simon took the oxygen out of the room in the tight end room. Brady Hunt's always talked about because Carolina won a big portal battle for him with A&M, and he made a very special play in the Missouri game to keep the Gamecocks in it. But what people forget is Michael Smith caught a touchdown in that game too. A really nice catch for a touchdown. So I think he's going to be a stud. I think this was one of those significant recruiting wins that you look at and you go, man, Carolina, how'd they end up with him out of Georgia? Georgia let him go. As much as Georgia loves to use the tight end, I'm sure they've got guys they like better on their board. But Michael Smith is another example of what I'm talking about when it comes to the Gamecocks signing the right players out of Georgia. That next tier. These days, Georgia is packed with players, just overflowing with players. Now, there's some that are a lot of, they're hype guys. They go, they maybe have a high star rating, a big offer list, and they get to their college and you never hear from them because they can't play dead in the movie. There is that in Georgia. South Carolina's experienced that about a decade ago, unfortunately. But then there's also that tier that historically Auburn's feasted off of. Michael Smith's that type of guy. Historically, you've had players come to Clemson, South Carolina that have done well. Tennessee has come into that state. Florida recruits up there. So a lot of South Carolina's SEC peer schools go into Georgia and do well, along with Clemson. North Carolina at times we'll dip into Georgia. NC State's gotten players, but it's that next tier. And when I say tier, I'm not necessarily talking about rankings. Tier to me, and how I define tier, and this is just me, is with offer sheets, options, so to speak. Your tier ones out of Georgia are and maybe this changes. They're Alabama, Georgia. Clemson does a good job in there too, and really can fight and win battles. Tennessee, as good as they're recruiting in North Carolina, they don't. Tennessee, Auburn, they've all. Auburn at one point was recruiting from tier one in Georgia, not so much anymore. Ohio State, Southern Cal has a guy on their staff that recruits Georgia well. I don't know how fruitful it's going to be. It's much like Alabama recruiting California. Who knows? Who knows if they'll stick? But that state is so loaded that there's an opportunity there. I thought the Spurrier staff didn't, while they got some really good players out of Georgia through the years. You think about Connor Shaw, obviously. You think about Mike Davis out of Georgia that was really good. They got good players, but I think they had a lot of busts out of that state as well. Busta Anderson was not a bust. Oh, there's a nice play on words, right? He was from Georgia. Historically, you look through the years, not Brad Edwards, Lord. I was thinking in my brain, don't say Brad Edwards. He's from North Carolina. But George Rogers, Georgia, Duluth. Go on down the list. You got Sterling Sharp from South Georgia player. A lot of really good ones out of Georgia. Dante Robinson was from Athens. A lot of good players. So, and then the Holtz, I'll take you back a little bit with this Georgia thing too. The Holtz era at the end, they weren't even recruiting Atlanta that well. John Strickland, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't mention that. John Strickland, who's on our show, who was starting center here and a captain. By the way, check out his interview yesterday if you want some insight into the Senior Bowl. He went through it. That was on the morning show. John Strickland's from Bainbridge, Georgia, home of Kirby Smart. So I felt that when Muschamp got here, they shrunk the board in Georgia. They were a little more selective, and they ended up getting some good players. J.J. Enigbare, J.C. Horn. There was a bunch of them that came out of that state that Muschamp left. Kevin Harris was from Georgia. And then Beamer, when you transition over, because you look at Will Muschamp, you had Brian McClendon on the staff. Bobby Bentley had recruited Georgia for years. You had a lot of guys that were familiar with that state in Atlanta and South Georgia and wherever. And so they leave and Beamer comes in. And so you're kind of like, well, maybe, hopefully they don't, because Beamer was on the Spurrier staff. And really he left before the let's just take anybody out of Georgia thing kind of started. But you're like, well, hopefully they keep this going. Well, they've done even better. They're even recruiting a little bit up in that tier two than Muschamp did with guys like Jelon Kilgore that they got. And then they're going in the portal and getting Georgia guys to kind of circle back. Like Kyle Kennard was an Atlanta guy. Demetrius Knight Jr. was an Atlanta guy. Both were evals that went to Georgia Tech and then kind of came to Kennard came directly from Georgia Tech, and then Knight, of course, went to Charlotte and then here. But so that's important, and that's Michael Smith, that's Wendell Gregory that they got in the last class. It's hard to go into Georgia and beat Georgia, and it always will be, no matter how good they are, no matter how bad they are. The good news is under Kirby Smart, they've shrunk their in-state board. And what used to happen is you look at the recruiting rankings most years. One year, Mark Richt didn't sign any of the top 10. That was the Cam Hayward year where he went to Ohio State. Georgia passed on a lot of them. But Georgia, under Richt, they would take a bunch of Georgia guys. Really, that was a hunk of their class. And I remember I interviewed Mark Richt on a teleconference one day while I was working for Rivals. And I asked him about their recruiting footprint. He said, we're going to recruit the state of Georgia and every state that touches it. And they do. And they did. But they were very Georgia heavy. So they would probably go 15 deep. Kirby doesn't do that. He shrunk it. And I thought, man, this could be a mistake. But what it does is they evaluate using the Saban method with critical factors and all that stuff. And so what they're doing is they fine tune. And fine tuning is great. And I think their hit rate in state is probably much higher than it was under Rick percentage wise. They're not taking as many. And then they go out all over the country to kind of fill with kind of like Alabama did, right? That's their plan. So you look at it, and obviously South Carolina went down the road with Oscar Delp. He was a legacy. They went down there, had Gunnar Stockton committed. He's at Georgia. But what that does is when Georgia UGA shrinks their in-state board and fine-tunes it and really hones in on those 9 or 10 guys they really want, just like Saban did at Alabama with Alabama kids, that leaves a whole swath of players that in another era probably would have been at UGA, but they're not. So every time Georgia takes an in-state commit, you probably should be happy, because that's another player that's going to pop up. There are too many in that state, and Georgia Tech, Brent Key is recruiting well. They do a great job of evaluating, especially offensive line. Georgia Tech is going to be a team that will be competing in the ACC under him. They've got a good method down there with what they do. And then Alabama's going to cross the border. Ohio State's not scared to recruit anywhere. You got Florida, you got Tennessee, you got a lot of competition. But when you take Georgia out of the equation, if you're South Carolina, you got at least a puncher's chance, probably a little bit better of a puncher's chance with the way they're recruiting. And then, as we all know, if you look at it and you say, well, in Georgia, the top 10 guys went to Georgia. Kirby's a great evaluator. As good as you are at evaluating, if you hit 70%, you're good. So that leaves. So if they took 10 of the top 10, but 6 or 7 of those are actually the top 10, that's 3 or 4 guys that could be top 10, end up, when you look back on it, being top 10 prospects in the state of Georgia. Then you come to South Carolina. This is just as good. Again, it doesn't matter what they are coming in so much as what they are when they get there and play and all that good stuff. So if you're the Gamecocks, I think that Michael Smith is an example of that. Jelon Kilgore is an example of that. You hope that continues. So hats off to Shane Beamer and his staff for recruiting the right guys out of Georgia. It's a critical state for the Gamecocks. And I'll wrap with this, probably expand on it a little more during the show. And look, I've said that twice now, so I want to be clear. I'm not going to do this every day. I'm not going to get on coffee and tease the show so you listen to it. They're standalone things. And I try not to double up on topics either. And today, you're going to get me on the morning show too. So I'll probably talk about something completely different. And it's not that I'm trying to get you to listen. I just, I think, hey, I'm happy if you listen to Coffee. I'm happy if you listen to the other shows. So please don't think that I'm going to morph this into teasing the later show. But we don't want Coffee to be an hour long. It was 49 minutes the other day. I want to keep it at 30, 35, if that makes any sense at all. But I will say this, North Carolina, we talk about it all the time. For 2026, it's going to be critical. And there's new offers going out there to jumbo athletes every single day. Sean Elliott offered some 6'6", 230-pound tight end from the Triad, Winston-Salem area, I believe. I'll have to double, maybe Greensboro. That's good. I mean, this class in South Carolina is really good. Even losing 2 of the best prospects that reclassified and are now at Carolina, and Gidron and Murph. But North Carolina, it's just like they're just kind of coming out of the woodwork. I see it almost every day, a new name up there. And so they're probably going to have to re-rank that and all that good stuff, because some of these guys are getting a lot of offers and look really good on film. Check out Tony Morell's scoop on thebigspur.com from yesterday. If you remember, he talks about a D tackle that I guess I haven't looked at all the D tackles uh, they've offered from the state of North Carolina. It's not the Aiden Harris kid that's highly ranked. It's another kid that Travian Robertson's all in on. And there are a slew D tackles, D ends. It's D line heaven, baby. Woo! There's some ends in South Carolina next year. Hadn't seen many tackles come up, but it's critical. That's going to be a critical state for this cycle. Along with, and Carolina's done a good job because North Carolina's been a tough nut to crack for a while for the Gamecock football program, mainly because of Mac Brown, but also because at North Carolina, more kids staying in state, but also because of the brand phenomenon that a lot of those prospects, especially around the Charlotte area, have, and now Tennessee, like I've been talking about. So the competition is thick in that state, but there's probably enough to go around, I think. So watch out for North Carolina being a critical state in recruiting heading forward. But yeah, wrapping up with Michael Smith, I project him, like I said, to start next year. I think he can make a big impact. Like I said, maybe Dingle ends up being that guy because he could be a surprise just because you don't know how usage was at Kentucky. He's a really athletic, talented, older player, and this is his last shot. And he was born in South Carolina. He's kind of coming back to his home state. So we'll see what happens with Dingle. But I think Michael Smith is a freaky dude. And with another year of development working with Sean Elliott, he could end up being no, the sky's the limit, I think, for him. And this program has had, starting with Jared Cook. I mean, Coach Spurrier never threw to the tight end at Florida, didn't throw the tight end at Florida a whole lot, but starting with Jared Cook, who was basically a big wideout, and they just kind of, just go out there and throw it up to Jared. Starting with him, you roll, the Saunders era. Pat DeMarco played some tight end with the NFL. I mentioned Busta Anderson earlier, Jarrell Adams, and then you got Justice Cunningham, and then Hayden Hurst gets a big nod. Jaheim Bell, when he was here for a minute, played really well. Nick Muse is in the NFL at tight end. Josh Simon will get drafted. Trey Knox had put up some good numbers when he was here. Don't forget Nate Adkins, the two-hit wonder, now playing for the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton. It's just been one of those things that this program should be proud of. I mean, the late, great Willie Scott and then Boomer Foster during the Sparky Woods, Brad Scott era were probably the two best. Other than that, it was just kind of at tight end. But back then, Cook got it started rocking and rolling, lasted a long time in the league. And another Georgia kid, tier 2 Georgia kid, Jared Cook. So we'll see what happens with Michael Smith. In basketball, I kind of said it all. Sloppy game, whatever. Next game is Saturday against A&M. The women are off until Sunday, by the way. And then they've got Auburn coming in. Auburn's struggling a little bit. That's a Sunday game on ESPN. I believe it's a noon tip-off. If it's not, don't shoot me. Look at the scroll at the bottom. All right, this has been Coffee with JC Shurburt. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate all the listens and mentions and all that good stuff. Don't forget, you can find this on our YouTube channel, Chief Sports South Carolina. Hit that subscribe button for me. It helps us. It doesn't cost you a penny. If you want to join Club Chief, it will cost you a penny. Pennies a day, $4.99 a month. You get access to the Nana Sports chat box for the morning show and the show. Our other shows, the chat box is open, though. So stop on by, chat with Joe on the walkthrough, chat with Matt and Alex during the Late Night Gamecock show. Obviously, during the season, the tailgate show is wide open. And we may have some more live stuff where we do let the general public into the chat box. It just got to be too much otherwise. So here's the deal. We'll be back on the morning show at 11. Me and Phil will be back at noon, from noon to 2, for all our fun. Thank you for listening to Coffee. This has been JC Shurburt signing off. Holla at you soon, folks.